All right. Welcome to the first episode of the Close Up, a part of the Orlando Magic HQ Network. I'm your host, Stephen Cameron, and I'm super psyched to be joining Al and Anthony over here at the HQ as well as the rest of the amazing crew that we have going on. This is my first show. My show is going to be coming out right now on a bi-weekly schedule. The goal is to eventually get it to a weekly schedule, but currently it's on a bi-weekly schedule. Going to be coming out on Tuesdays, and then you'll have Al and Anthony with the Orlando Magic HQ original show on Fridays, and then with our man Stanley and Bryce hosting spaces after every game and after major announcements. Their show is also posted to the podcast podcast platforms, so make sure you're tuning in for all of that. The Orlando Magic HQ is proudly presented by Bet Online. The last of major pro sports leagues kicks off this week, and Bet Online is your top spot for all your NBA action this season. The NBA has been going on for about a week now. We've had some really exciting matchups. The Magic are 2-0 right now, going into their game versus the Lakers and the Clippers. If you guys want to get some money down on that, Bet Online is the place to go. With MLB and postseason, NFL and college football and NHL all in full swing, Bet Online is your number one source for wagering news, odds, trends, and predictions. Get everything NBA at your fingertips with both the desktop and mobile access for every sport anytime. Y'all want to make some bets? You want to get some cash? See if you can make the right call? Go to Bet Online. Do it. Head over to Bet Online today to get in on the action. Don't forget to use the promo code BLEAV, 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 to receive your 50% welcome bonus on your first deposit. You deposit money, they're going to give you 50% of that in a welcome bonus. All right, it's pretty dope. Make sure you, again, use promo code BLEAV, BLEAV. Bet Online, where the game starts. Thank you for Bet Online for being our presenting sponsor for this episode. All right, this week I have Justin Verrier of the Ringer Podcast Network. He's awesome. He's on group chat twice a week with Big Waz, Rob Mahoney, and I think a couple other people. He shows up on a bunch of the shows, though. He's great. He's got a really interesting perspective on the NBA. It's nice to chat with a national media member and how they kind of go about their job, looking at different storylines throughout the league and just like staying tapped in. We got to talk. Justin and I recorded this on Friday, and this show will be coming out on Tuesday, so a few days behind. We didn't know about the Portland game results at that point in time. The Magic were 1-0 when we recorded this, but we talked a little about Justin's like background into media, and then we talk about how national media, or at least he as a national media member, goes about following the bigger teams, the major storylines, but also like staying tapped in with the smaller market teams and being tuned in there, which is a really interesting conversation. And then of course we get into like Magic specific stuff. I think you all are going to really enjoy it. Make sure you give Justin Verrier a follow. Make sure you tune into all things of the Ringer Podcast Network. They're great. One of my favorite go-tos for NBA related news when I'm not wanting to know just about the Magic, but about the rest of the league. I find them very helpful and good content there. So without further ado, we'll get to the conversation that I had with Justin. And again, let's go Magic. Justin, what is up, man? Happy Friday. How you doing today?
Great. Thank you for having me. I'm also very excited to not have to be the one who has to read the ads, and so I can be on the other side of that. But you did a great job.
Appreciate it. I've done a few of them, and happy to take that responsibility anytime you want to come on the show and take a break.
Sure thing.
Man, we are a couple of days into the NBA season. It's Friday. Games tipped off on Tuesday or Wednesday. Some exciting things have happened around the league. Magic had their first game the other night. We'll get to them a little bit more specifically, but how are you feeling just in general with the NBA season kicking off?
Definitely fatigued. I would say that because the preseason tends to be as much of a sprint as it is for the teams as the first couple of weeks, just getting everything in order and figuring out all the plans for that stuff. But I have to say, I can't remember the last time I was as excited as I am for an NBA season. I'm obviously always plugged in and ready to roll. And this first opening week, like weekend, is always kind of like a special, almost holiday for NBA fans. But this year, man, it just feels like there's just so much talent in the league. To the point where, like, that Rockets Magic game that you were referring to, like, I'm looking up and down the roster, and there's just like 9 guys on each team that I like. The league is in a really good state right now.
Yeah, it's a lot of fun. You have a lot of parity within the league with some guys. You have some new, fresh excitement with like Dame going to the Bucks, and maybe Harden will land somewhere, and just some other moving parts. Drew Holiday and Boston. There's just a lot of new things to be excited about, and also some good up and coming teams that are coming along, and it's just been a lot of fun. Let's dial it back a little bit before we get too much into like this current state of the NBA. And I want to learn a little bit more about your journey with basketball, how you fell in love with the sport, what team you grew up watching. So take us back. What's your journey with the sport and your relationship with it?
Sure. So I grew up in Connecticut. And so there isn't like a natural connection to a lot of NBA teams there. It's weird because Connecticut is pretty much split down the middle between Boston teams and New York teams, to the point where like the Hartford Current, the local paper that I grew up with, covered both, which is like
Okay.
really odd to say now in 2023. And so you gravitate to one or the other, but we also had UConn. Right. And UConn was everything growing up. Like when I first started to be conscious of sports, like that's when the Calhoun team started to take off. It's like when Emeka Okafor was like at his heyday, and even before that with Rip Hamilton. So I really came up as a college fan first and foremost, until I got to ESPN right out of college, or just in college, and there just happened to be a spot as like a part-time first intern and then eventually more in the NBA section. And that is kind of what I really hit my peak as an NBA fan. I was kind of a late arriver to it. It's weird to say that I've literally never covered anything else since then. That was about, God, it was probably like 15, 16 years ago now. And so, yeah, like it definitely, maybe I didn't have the natural like growth process I think a lot of people had, but certainly nowadays, like I can't imagine being into any other sport as much as I am into the NBA.
I get that. I used to be really heavy into NFL, and then when I started like covering the Magic from a distance 7, 8 years ago, I've like completely stopped paying any attention to the NFL. So I kind of understand what you're saying. When it comes to like your fandom, living in Connecticut, kind of in that Northeast area, have a couple teams to choose from. Did you have a team that you like generally gravitated to more and like followed on a closer basis until you started like covering the league at whole?
Not really, if only because when I was in, like, say, high school, was when the Celtics were in a tough spot. It was like the building toward the Antoine and Paul Pierce sorts of
Yeah.
teams, and so it was kind of like that. Like, even though they ultimately were relatively successful, they were kind of tough to watch at times. And the Knicks were very much in the Eddie Curry, Stephen Marbury, like, let's just throw stuff against the wall and like try to
Yeah.
figure these things out on the fly. Eventually, the Celtics got pretty good, and I was pretty plugged into them when they were making that run with KG, and so that was like the first teams that I really liked. But it was like, unfortunately, I just hit it at such a rough time growing up that like the NBA wasn't really calling to me as a fan because it didn't have a lot to sell locally. But yeah.
That makes sense. Now, currently where you're at, do you have teams that you gravitate more, or does that kind of change season by season based on like storyline and team building?
Yeah, so it actually benefited me long term because I don't have a single fandom
Sure.
or anything like that to do, and so I really do just kind of gravitate toward whichever team is interesting. Like obviously, I have to check the boxes. I have to watch all the important teams, especially as the season goes on. You realize certain teams are kind of dropping out of the mix and playing more for draft picks. But like you really do kind of gravitate toward what is interesting, and I think it actually helps in my job because you're really trying to keep track of so much to be able to like almost step back and see how a general fan is looking at things and see what teams are spiking and interesting. I think it helps a good degree. And so like the Thunder, for instance, are a prime example this year. The Pelicans sometimes, whenever they're healthy with Zion, are interesting. And so I kind of follow where the energy is.
That makes a lot of sense. And like, I mean, in pure journalist form, you're supposed to be kind of a neutral fan base anyways. We've had a couple of beat writers on the show over the years and other national writers and stuff like that. And they always talk about, especially ones that are like old school journalism, like trying not to put any bias, trying not to have any fandom to it. And you being able to like kind of do that organically is nice. It's funny too, because I feel like a lot of new fans right now, the younger generation, particularly that it's the NBA is so story driven individually, right? Where it's almost sometimes less about the team and more about the individual, and on and off the court, just kind of the way this new, the current Adam Silver era has developed over the last 10, 15 years, or I guess 10 years or so. And it's just an interesting perspective to kind of pull out and look at that from like not only a media perspective, but like you see fans online and in interactions. I don't really follow a team. I have a jersey from like, half the teams in the league and none of them have to do with a player. It's just like players they like. It's just interesting that we've kind of gotten to that place with fandom too. Now, Justin, from like a media side, right? Again, you work for The Ringer. You are deputy editor, I think is what you have in your bio, sure. Which is fun.
Yep.
But like from a national media standpoint, when you are being asked to watch the league at whole, what is like a strategy to where you feel like you can get a good grasp of what's going on? For obviously, like we know from a marketing and media perspective, like you have to watch the Lakers. You have to watch and stay tuned. I mean, I'm assuming stay tuned to Boston Celtics and like the top contenders, but how do you go about balancing out the rest of the league so you can kind of like stay informed? And the reason why I ask this question is because like there's always some fan, a part of some small market team that says, oh, national media doesn't pay attention to our team. Oh, you always get those narratives. So like, I'd love to hear from a media perspective, like what is your approach? And like, in my opinion, obviously the national media is not going to know certain teams as well as someone who watches 82 games sometimes on replay, right? Like it makes a little bit of sense there for there to be some difference of opinions from someone who's tuning into a couple of games a month versus and again, I don't know. I just love to hear your thoughts on that whole like subject.
Yeah, it's like a cross section of things. I think the standings dictate a lot of it. So, for instance, like a team like the Denver Nuggets doesn't typically play in a giant market that doesn't have like a particularly fervent or robust fan base, right? Like they have great fans, but like just in raw numbers terms, like they obviously can't stand to the Lakers, which is probably one of the biggest fan bases in all sports, right?
Totally.
And so but the Nuggets have been incredible. So you have to put resources to covering the Nuggets and like you have to pay attention to what they're doing. And so like the standings dictate a lot of it. I do think like just general interest also kind of dictates a lot of it. And then it gets into the really dicey area where it's like, well, if the Lakers are bad, but they still have millions of fans, like people are still going to be interested in it. So like it doesn't necessarily have to boil down to success. I think that's where people probably get the most perturbed because like, let's say the Magic just are on a finals run and the Lakers are playing for the lottery. They're like, well, why aren't you focusing on the Magic as opposed to the Lakers? Another big part of it, I think, is also conflict. Like I get kind of confused at times because like throughout throughout history, the way we've understood how to understand story, how to understand narrative is through conflict, right? Like the parts of a story, conflict is right there in the middle, and it's like one of the biggest parts of it. And so for a team that is good, that ends up being good, like where are the natural tension points there? Right? Like where's the conflict there? And so I just think by sheer dint of like the fact that a lot of people are interested in the Lakers, and there are so many people covering them and unearthing that conflict. I think it naturally like compounds, and it like keeps things more centered on those teams.
Sure.
But I also think that's why a lot of media types like myself are now so excited about a team like the Magic, some of these League Pass teams, Detroit, uh, because like early in the season right now, we like it's all a level playing field. Like we're excited to dive in and find out all these new things about certain teams. Eventually, by mid-season, they'll probably have to drop off just by just like the fact that they aren't as relevant as some other teams.
Sure.
But yeah, it's a mix of different things. I hope that answered your question because that was a little rambling.
No, it does, and I mean I think it gives listeners some perspective too, right? It's there's a job, but you have to also follow storylines, you have to follow interest, you have to follow fandom, and there's just different ways that you're going to get pulled in different directions, right? And it doesn't mean I didn't take that as like doesn't mean you're not paying attention to the other teams. You're just not able to give them the same type of energy that you're giving to another team that might have more reason to pull that interest mid-season towards the end of the season, right? It's just it's interesting. So go ahead. Sorry, were you about to say something?
Yeah, I was just going to say it's actually the job of us and someone who's like good at it to be able to show to the lay fan why a team like the Magic are interesting. It's like it takes a little bit more work. That doesn't mean that you can't still do that work on the side, right? Like, you're gonna have to convey it in a way that makes them more interested to the general Lakers fan who cares more about superstars.
Sure, that makes sense. And to be fair, like when I think about the Ringer and how you all cover the league and the diversity on the teams, I think you all do a pretty good job of it. But then like you guys do things like Kevin O'Connor will have his show that is mostly about like young up and coming talent, and sometimes it's draft people, sometimes it's like younger players in the league. I think he's still doing that. Maybe it's every so often. I know he typically does it like later in the season when draft is picking up, but those types of shows and episodes are always like really fun and exciting because oftentimes like, cool, you're not talking about the Celtics, right? But you are able to talk about the Nets, who have like some nice young talent on that team, and or OKC is maybe a better example, right? Or the Rockets, where there's some younger talent that might, like Rockets last season, that didn't get the same type of coverage, where they'll get more this year simply because of their roster moves. But things like that, in which I've always appreciated those types of shows as well. When you think about young teams, up and coming teams, and the Magic and the Pistons and the Rockets and all these different people or teams, like where do you kind of, when I say the word the Orlando Magic in that context, like what are some of the first thoughts that come to your mind?
What's interesting about the Magic is I almost feel like they're a little bit more mature than some of the teams that are young and up and coming. They're almost like on the precipice of no longer being considered young and up and coming, which I think is a credit to just how well they've drafted and how quickly guys like Paolo and Franz have come along.
Sure.
I was even like Markelle Fultz. Like, how long has Markelle Fultz even been in the league? But when I look at him on the court, he's now this like steady hand in the process, which is wild for me to think about because, like, considering his whole story in the league is like one of the weirdest things that I think anybody has ever seen. And all of a sudden, he is now like the consummate veteran, like steadying an offense and pulling it back out and being like, guys, let's slow it down. And so I definitely think they're certainly in the mix there, and I'm sure someone might, like a lot of people would probably group them into like the next wave of teams coming. But like, I mean, I watched the game the other day, and they just have a certain maturity to even their young talent that a team like the Rockets, which played quite poorly, and like I hope it doesn't end up being like that yet again this season under Udoka. But like, I almost feel like it's not too soon with the Magic for expectations, right? Like I could see a play and run this year, which feels like pretty great progress from where they were last year.
I get that. I I mean, you're saying things that the Magic are saying right now. They're even saying words playoff on a pretty regular basis, like, through media day and training camp. Those were things that the players and the coaching staffs were constantly saying, and I think they finally have changed the bar from development and evaluation to we got to make some noise, and I think they would be satisfied with the play-in. I think they have hopes to do better than that. I don't know if that's realistic or not. I feel like I'm kind of like a modest Magic fan when it comes to expectations of this team, and I would be psyched if they made the play-in. I'd be disappointed if they didn't. I'd honestly consider it a failure if they didn't make the play-in this year. I don't know if I expect like landing the 6th seed and avoiding the play-in. That's kind of like where I view this team coming into the season. It's interesting though, because like you talked about this team finally feeling like they have a maturity and like a stability to them. And it's like, man, I'm so glad we got here, because we went through a decade of not having that. With the first rebuild under Jacques Vaughn and I'm spacing on the GM's name probably for good Rob Hennigan, like that whole era. Oladipo, Tobias Harris, that like all failed with Scott Skiles for a season. And then, we had this new regime that I think had some mandate to like make the Vooch era be as best as it could. And then we finally got to tear that down. So like this is the 3rd rebuild since Dwight, which is wild to think about in a decade plus. So it's nice to finally we have some stability. This is probably the most exciting season as a Magic fan that I've had in that last decade of rebuild, and it sounds like it might be more similar for you in that sense too. Am I wrong there, or have there been past generations that you've been a little bit more psyched on?
Yeah, this one certainly, because like the let's get to the 8th seed Aaron Gordon teams certainly were tough ones to watch. I mean, if you want to go all the way back, obviously Shaq and Penny teams were just absolute basketball pornography.
Sure.
Like even like just a clip you stumble upon on Twitter or whatever, and I'll watch those all day. But like certainly in the modern era, like I can't imagine I can't remember any team that would have like come close to this. It's to the point where it's like they're probably going to have to diminish recent young picks that they've had, and like Suggs and some other guys, just because they don't fit the current vision of that. Which is like, how long have we been waiting for the Magic just to have the type of young core talent in order to bring them to this level? Now they're basically saying like, do these guys fit our timeline? Like they have a timeline, which is like kind of remarkable and kind of special. And I can't imagine for you, it's like it's probably a really fun time right now.
We drafted 2 players in the top 12 this last year, in Anthony Black and Jet Howard. Regardless of how we all think those were the right moves or the wrong moves to make with those picks, I have my thoughts, so we can get to them later if you want to hear them. But like, we're finally in a year where it's like, oh, we drafted 2 guys like pretty high in the lottery, and they're not a part of our core rotation. Like, we don't need to rely on them, and we can kind of let them grow like in a different lower pressure way, or maybe trade like when we do some consolidations, or roles might expand or whatever. But it's like, wait, I don't have to rely on Anthony Black for 30 minutes a night to lead this team to wins. He can just like do his thing and then come in as injuries happen and whatnot, like in a different organic way. It's like, that's really special. I don't have to throw them to the fire right away. Like, I'm not used to that, especially in the last couple of years. But we do have some young draft picks in the last couple of years that are like by far really exciting. Paolo Banchero and Franz Wagner. Let's start with Paolo. Rookie of the year last year. Were you kind of envisioning him as the number 1 pick, or were you on like Team Chet, Team Jabari with that draft pick? And like, do you see him as the man that like a lot of us do? I think I do. I feel like you've even said it on the pods that I've listened to, but like, for the people that might not have heard you say it, like, what's your opinion on Paolo?
Yeah, so I'm not as much of a draft Nick as some of my other colleagues. And so
Sure.
I kind of like let everybody tell me what I should think coming into the league. I kind of want to catch these guys in summer league and then start developing my opinions through there. And so I will say I was, like everyone else, pretty surprised when they took him after, I guess, giving smoke screens that it was Jamari Smith for so long. But I think we learned pretty quickly why they did that. I think it was like his first game as an NBA player where he took off, and then worst case, if you want to look at his rookie season, just had the free throw drawing rate of like an NBA veteran, like an all NBA type of player. And so, I mean, it's kind of a tried and truism at this point. It's kind of like a cliche, but like guys who can do that are like the superstars in this league. And then like I love watching Paolo shine in a backup center role in Team USA, because to me that was a clear indication that he can exceed whatever role that you're going to put him into, right? Like he's clearly more talented to that, but he still managed to pop in the midst of other all-star, all-NBA caliber players. And so I'm really high on him. I'm honestly curious how you think about this though, because I am really intrigued by the almost like, which flavor are you, a Franz or a Paolo? Because while I do see that them being able to grow together, it almost feels like an interesting discussion point. And it seems like people lean one way or another, almost depending on preference at this point. Do you find yourself gravitating to one or the other?
I mean, I do. I don't know if I necessarily need to right now, but it is a discussion that is like within all sorts of like fandom and media, like, oh, Team Paolo, Team Franz, like which one really is going to be him for this team? And like, I lean towards Paolo. There's reasons, like Franz is amazing, but Paolo is just a different type of scorer that I've seen. I don't think he's as polished as a ball handler yet, like running pick and rolls and things like that, but he can certainly get there. He's got really good passing vision as well, of passing out of like double teams and stuff like that, and he's got a really nice handle. I think like when I say like playmaking, ball handling, it's more like setting up the offense. Like he can run a pick and roll, he can run ISOs, he can run DHOs, but I think when things get a little bit more hectic, like having more of that the stability factor is something that he'll have to grow into. But then there's like the two-way ability of Franz, where it's like he can shoot the three. He's got an excellent finishing package. He's got a nice little floater. Kind of lacks a mid-range game. And he's a plus defender right now. And that plus defender constantly on the plus side of that is like those two-way guards or those two-way wings at like 6'10" that can do that kind of stuff is just insane. And it's hard not to see that where like there still is question marks about the defensive side and where Paolo will ultimately land. Will he eventually be a consistent positive on the defensive side, or is he going to have like some good nights, some bad nights, depending on it? More like, you know, the question still needs to be answered there, I think, for Paolo, for me to say like I'm fully on board with him being that awesome two-way player. But I think his scoring is just like, I mean, scoring wins championships. So does defense, and so does two-way play. But you're not going to get there if you don't have a guy on your team that's able to hit 25 to 30 points on night on a regular basis. And I think Franz can be a 20-point per game scorer. I don't know if, even if we didn't have Paul on this team, if he is going to be on a championship level team, if he would be a 25-point per game scorer. And that's where like the question mark is. And I do think there is importance there from like the 20 to 25 range and whatnot on the ability to like just carry the team in that aspect.
Sure.
Which way do you lean? Or do you even start leaning?
You know, it's interesting. It almost comes down to something I've seen before versus something that could like elicits possibility and wonder. Like we know the Franz model, right? He's probably bigger than most big wings, but he does kind of fit neatly into that category. And like the defense, good God, like his ability to do it on both ends this soon even is remarkable. And so like he's got to be in the highest percentile, or his ceiling has to be in the highest percentile of like the top big wings that like we've seen in recent years. Paolo's just different. And like for me, I like all the weirdos, but like just like kind of envisioning what he could be just like works part of my brain that I didn't know existed. Like he's basically has the body control, and I try not to use this comp lightly, of LeBron, considering like his size, but also his ability to move. But he's bigger than LeBron. And so it's like I've never seen anything like him. He's probably not in the Wemby territory because nobody is, but he's got to be in that like just super unique like cross section of size and skill and different attributes that like I'm just so intrigued by him. And maybe he won't be as easy of a plug and play guy for that. Like I wonder, for instance, if he's so unique, does the guy that you put at center or even at point guard have to be equally unique in order to fit him in? But like, what an exciting, exhilarating problem to have.
Yeah, these are all good problems we're talking about.
Right.
Yeah, no, I agree. Like, he's so unique. There's like the other comp, which is not nearly as a sexy comp to like the LeBron, is like Julius Randle, right? This like big guy that's like I think Randle's like 6'9" or something like that, kind of thicker body too, muscular, and has good handling, good shooting, good playmaking a little bit there, but there's just like a difference even that like obviously I hope Paolo has a much better career and ceiling than Randle does. No disrespect to him, great player, but I don't think you're winning a championship with Randle as your primary guy, right? And so it's like there is that just like another type of archetype, not so much comp, right? Just like an archetype of a body of a basketball player there. But yeah, man, he's special. Like when he figures out his efficiency a little bit more on scoring, and gets that like 3-point shot more consistent from the outside, it's gonna be scary against anyone because like he can go down and bang in the paint with the bigs. He can handle wings on the outside and shoot threes over their heads, or just like handle a mismatch and take it to the basket and draw. I mean, I think he got to I don't have the box score up in front of me, but I think he had like 9 free throws in the game versus the Rockets the other night or something like that. And he averaged 8 last season as a rookie, which is just like insane. I think for me, what's going to take Paolo from like, I am an all-star to like a superstar, Justin, is when he gets that playmaking and the ability to make his teammates better. I do wonder about like team building with him though, like you were mentioning. Like we might need to have someone, like no disrespect to Wendell Carter, I'm not sure he's the right fit for Paolo long term, in the Magic team long term. I was actually just having this conversation with some friends about Jonathan Isaac, right? If he had that monster performance on Monday, and let's say he plays 60 games this year, like, is he ultimately our starting center when games matter at the end of the season and we're like playing for playoff positioning or play-in positioning? Like, is he the better fit? Maybe. I don't know.
Probably. It's tough because Wendell has been so good for that team.
Yeah.
Is just like almost like a stabilizer. It's funny. I was talking to Rob Mahoney the other day because we do that top 100 rankings on the Ringer, and he's like advocating for Wendell to be on the list. And I'm like, I get it. And maybe based purely off of just like what we know about him now, he certainly deserves to be in consideration. But like, that's the trade-off there. It's like they probably need just a little bit more from that. And like, Isaac is like everything that like almost a lot of these teams want. Like there's so many like fours who are stuck between that 4-5 zone, but they need someone to like mask all of their deficiencies. Like Isaac is the mobile rim protector whose shot looked really good the other night. And so like, is that not just like the exact type you'd want, not only for like Apollo, but for a lot of these guys, Zion
Totally
down the list. Yeah. So it's tough.
He's kind of like that perfect defender to help clean up mistakes. I mean, and thankfully he's playing next to another big that needs a lot of mistakes cleaned up, and Mo Wagner, Mo Wagner. Sorry, like that dude is like a cone defensively, so you need JI to help him out there. Let's back away from like the Franz Paolo subject for a second. I want to ask some more questions. Like when you think about the rest of this Magic team, what questions do you hope to see answered this season with them? Whether it's roster building or ceiling wise, like what are just some questions you still like need to know more of?
Yeah, I think because of where Franz and Paolo are already, the most interesting part of this team is just the guards.
Yeah.
Right. And it sucks because I am a Suggs fan because he does seem like he tries really hard all the time. And obviously the injuries have been a big concern for him over his first 2 seasons. But he seemed like in that Rockets game, like he was pressing way too hard. And I wonder if he's aware already at this point that this is probably a prove it year for him, if only because the expectations are rising, but they're also starting to bring guys in that could potentially bump him at the very least to the second unit, if not maybe just off the
Sure.
team in general. I thought it was really interesting that Suggs had a bad game in that first game, and then all of a sudden Anthony Black comes in, just playing 5 minutes of garbage time, and he looked incredible. Like he got the 2 blocks, and not only did he get that second block, but when they called it against him, the entire bench rallied in order to like get them to review it.
Yeah.
And maybe they were just so hyped to see the young guys out there in general, but it seems like they're already rallying around Black as a potential like guy on this team. And it's a certain point, like you're kind of riding the tide, and like you don't want to suppress who could be maybe a key player for this team just to keep trying beating your head against the wall with Suggs. And then it becomes an interesting conversation of like, well, if you want to start Black or even make him a big part of your core, like what does that do to Fultz? Is there so much overlap there because you might want to give Black the ball more? Are you taking the ball out of Paolo's hand? And so it's really all the conversations that trickle down from Paolo and Franz that I'm really interested in, that like probably will dictate the ceiling of this team. I think like they're in line to be very good. Like could they be like Thunder down the road great if they just nail now the successive moves, the fourth and fifth guys? That's like really interesting to me about this team.
Yeah, I totally agree, and I think a lot of Magic fans agree. Like, we have a lot of guards right now, and it's which ones are going to be fitting? Like, and I think it's okay to have that confusion this season, but that answer probably needs to be figured out next season as they try to make, maybe play-in is not satisfactory anymore, and you need to be winning the play-in and being a playoff team, and starting to creep into like the solid top 8 of the East. And I don't know if you can do that without knowing the answers that we need to know. It's like Suggs is a phenomenal defender. He's a disruptor of a defender. He's not just like, I can slow down someone on ball, I'm a good team defender. He literally disrupts the offense from other teams. But that offense for him needs to catch up to where his defense is. And if it doesn't, it's like, I don't know if you can have Fultz, who can't space the floor from 3, next to Suggs, who also has been pretty inconsistent with his floor spacing abilities too. And I mean, you're not going to gain respect from a defender if you don't eventually start hitting it, right? Terrence Ross, we go back to this example of Terrence Ross sometimes, where it's like, Terrence Ross wasn't like an amazing 3-point shooter. He never really had too many seasons where he was shooting like above career, like league average. Like, I think most of the time with Magic, he was like around 33-34%, but he was such a threat from 3 and hitting tough shots that he drew defenders anyways. And like Suggs has got a long ways to go there to get there, even if he is shooting 38%, from that side. And ultimately, if you have Paolo and Franz, who are awesome at driving to the basket, like, you need guys that they can kick out to hit shots. At least that's my view of team building and what I ultimately think needs to happen. And I think it also, like you mentioned, like, brings up a question around Fultz. Like, is he the right fit for this guard long term? He certainly is today. He's a nice stabilizer, but like, is he the right guy, next to them without that floor spacing ability? He's got different gravitational pulls that he can do with the ball in his hands, but ultimately, we live in a 3-point shooting league these days, So yeah, that's interesting. What do you think about Mosley, the coach, Jamal Mosley? I mean, he's been in the league for a while. He was an assistant with the Mavs for a little bit. I feel like he's doing a fairly good job with the Magic this year, and just in general. But do you think he is has the potential to be like a good playoff coach?
He could be. I'll be honest, I haven't seen a ton of them just because we haven't had as much of a sample size of
Sure.
like meaningful games. And so like, I'm not sure like he's reached the point where the litmus test even kicks in yet. But like, I think what you hear about him in the league is that like a lot of people had a very high opinion of him. I know things like ended messily in Dallas for him, but I think he was always on the short list of guys that teams were interested in, in order to ascend to that level. And so, I wonder if there's like a little bit, I mean, you tell me, of like just maybe there's a little fear that he could be a Jacques Vaughn type, and where it's like the next of a certain generation, like maybe we should have more of a steady hand there and more of a proven coach. But so far so good. I've heard mostly good things about him, but frankly, I'll be honest, I think it's kind of an incomplete at this point until we see them play competitive basketball.
That's the same for me. I like him for now. I
Yeah.
think he's done a great job with developing the core and getting these guys to grow as young basketball players, and building team chemistry. But yeah, we have no idea if he's going to be able to do schemes against specific teams in the playoffs. And I hope that's a question we get to figure out this year, but maybe not, maybe it's next year. But yeah, we got to figure that out too. And so yeah, I agree. Incomplete's a good response there. When it comes to like all the extensions that were handed out the other day, were you surprised to hear Cole Anthony land one? And like, what do you think about like 3 years and $39 million that he got?
I sense that it wasn't well received in Orlando.
Oh no, I think a lot of us were hyped. I think a lot of people were expecting him to actually get more and not accept something for that and go hit say, no, I'm going to go into restricted free agency and prove to you that I'm worth more. I actually thought this was another prove it year for him, like it is for Suggs. So I was shocked to see he got extended, particularly at that number.
Yeah, I wonder if there was like a little bit of a trend happening there, because we saw more low-level extensions than I think we ever have. We might have seen like more extensions, rookie contract extensions, than we have, as far as I can remember. Like it's usually like the top guys, and certainly the flexibility with the contracts that they added in the new CBA helps, where you can sign guys to 5 years without giving them the max. Vassell and Jaden McDaniels were clear examples of that. So that's good. Like I like teams having more mechanisms to reward the guys that have proven themselves over this, and not having to force them to go to restricted free agency, which we've seen has been kind of a gamble. I wonder if that's part of it too. It's that so many guys get to restricted free agency and then all of a sudden the music stops, I think teams are, even though they've tried to make it easier to sign restricted free agents, I think they shortened the length of where you have to wait out and allow the team to match. I just think teams want to get things done so quickly, because let's be honest, things are pretty much done by the time free agency actually opens. And so they don't want to get hung up so often. And so you're wondering where are these guys going to get contracts? Like you saw Obi Toppin basically get just traded for nothing, purely because the Knicks had already given Dante DiVincenzo his contract, and they needed a mechanism to get him in there. And so it seems like a lot of guys sign for less than you expected, maybe just to get something on the books, maybe because teams are more reticent to give out those mid-tier contracts and squeeze those guys out with the second apron sort of problems. Cole Anthony is an interesting player just in general, though, to me, because he's almost like the type of player you appreciate until the stakes get high enough that you're upset that he's getting the ball so often. Like I was watching that Rockets game and I'm like, he's the type of player a coach probably loves, because the offense is gumming up a little bit and he's going to get you like 15 points. You can go to him to win games, but I wonder at a certain point if you don't want to have that crutch in place in order to take the next leap, because you need other guys who could do various different things in the playoff setting. And so for now, I like him. I too was surprised that the Magic brought him back, considering how many guards they have on their roster. But it's a good contract. He's a good player. Just let's keep rolling him out until he's not as useful anymore.
Yeah, totally. I mean, and if they need to move him, they can move him after the season ends, when they can trade players that are just signed extensions and stuff like that. So Justin, we've been talking for about 40 minutes now, and I've been really appreciative of your time. I have 2 short questions for you, and then we'll wrap this podcast up.
Sure.
My first, I'll just lay them both out there, and then you can answer them whatever way you want. First, I want to know where you think the Magic will end this season, and then 2, give me a bold take, a hot take that might come true, but it's also really realistic that couldn't come true too.
So I'm an optimist, probably against my better judgment, just because my one thing that I try to really hold myself accountable to is that young players just aren't good. They're not they're not positives on the court because they're so young, and like they have to actually build up to that point. And the Magic, despite what we were saying about how precocious some of these guys are still very young. And if anything, they might get to the point if the results aren't coming through, maybe wanting to take a step back, allowing Black and Jet Howard and like God, they Houston and all these other guys, like giving them more opportunities, right? I would say that they're probably going to make the play in this year, if only because the East is just like kind of a mess outside of like the top couple teams. Like, are the Bulls that much better than the Magic? It's like, I don't think so.
Kind of.
Right.
Yeah.
They're all in kind of the same range here, which is an advantage for the Magic. They're in the West, probably not this year, but I think the door is open for them to make it. So I would say probably like 8-9 range would be my guess off the top of my head. In terms of a bold take, my bold take is that like Paolo will be an all-star, but I feel like that's not that bold anymore. Like I feel like that's something a lot of people are saying. I will say that Anthony Black is starting by the end of the year, if only because I'm not a Suggs believer.
Sure.
I just think he probably needs to change of scenery in a different role. I wonder, as I'm saying this out loud, if Mosley will probably want to stick with Suggs, if only because of the defense. It sounds like they're really interested in like developing that foundation there. But I'm just so high in Black. I like in 2 minutes of real basketball, he impressed me. And even in summer league, I just found his preternatural ability to move around the court and just have that ease of confidence and whatnot was really impressive to me. So that's bold, I think.
I like that. My good friend CJ is gonna love your Anthony Black take, who is like all about like the same thing you just said. Not sold on Suggs and loves Anthony Black. Justin, I really appreciate you coming on the show and tuning in. It's been a fun conversation. I imagine most people that are listening to my show might know where your work can be found, but if not, can you please just plug anything you want to plug?
Sure, yeah. TheRinger.com, a great website, and the group chat podcast with Rob Mahoney and Big Waz every Sundays and Wednesdays this year.
One of my favorite shows as well. Appreciate it, man. Magic fans, thanks for tuning in. Again, this episode was brought to you by Bet Online. Shout out to Al and Anthony at Orlando Magic HQ for allowing me to merge with them and bring my show to their amazing platform. I'm looking forward to growing it even more with them after wrapping up my old show after 5 years, I think. So anyways, thanks for welcoming in all you Magic HQ fans. Again, Justin, thanks for joining me, and we'll see y'all next time. Peace.